down that camera and strap in. It's time for another episode of TOGCHAT Live. Get ready for 60 minutes of wall-to-wall photography, including photo news and tips, along with your photography questions in real time, with answers from your host, Olympus Visionary Joe Edelman.
Hey gang, I'm back. So for those of you that were here at 6 o'clock, you know that the power went out. Like literally, the power went out. They have been working in my neighborhood and around my neighborhood all day long. The power company has. They've been out with helicopters on high tension wires and stuff. Cool stuff. And literally, mid-sentence, the power went out. So it's back on. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that it's going to stick. And we're going to give this a go. So for those of you that, decided you had other things to do and didn't want to wait around all night, I completely respect that. And I apologize. This was beyond my control. But I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to start from the top. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to see if we can't get in a show here, right? And make this happen. So first of all, I'm going to ask you guys to bear with me for a second while I get myself set up so that I can see the comments. There we are. Good. So now I've got comments. I'm going to check one more spot here. Just to make sure that I got everything. Cool. So I got some people coming back in here. It is great to see all of you. And again, I apologize, obviously. Nothing that I could control there. All right. So unfortunately, I also lost all of the questions that folks had been kind enough to type in. So if you're here, I'm going to do a whole hour. It's 6:30 now. I'm going to go till 7:30. So leave me your questions. Let me know how I can help you. And please certainly check in. Let me know you're here. Let me know where you are from, right? So I need to actually change one other thing around here so that I have some notes to work off of that I had set up. So let me put those in front of me. Not everything came back on the way I wanted, but we're here and we're good. So tonight, I told you guys, my plan was to introduce you to a bunch of my photography idols, which is kind of a weird phrase because photographers aren't really, rock stars or anybody that's, kind of that exciting or fancy. But hey, right? There are people that we think are worth certainly looking up to, trying to emulate, trying to learn from. And growing up as a teenager, there were quite a few photographers that I idolized. And for the most part, it was for a combination of their creativity and their accomplishments. And, accomplishments that they had collected throughout their career. Now, for me, keep in mind, this was, mid to late 70s, early 80s were my teenage, early 20 years. So at the time, most of my idols were contemporary for the late 70s and the late 80s. But I was passionate about photography, and still am, of course. And also, I was really always kind of a student of history. I found history rather fascinating and still do. So I think that, if you put those two together, it would be remiss, or I would be remiss if I didn't also mention, and that I do idolize, did and still do today, some of the greats. Bresson, Irving Penn, Edward Weston. Another name who's not necessarily thought of as one of the greats, but who has incredible historical significance is a photographer by the name of Matthew Brady. In 7th grade, my social studies teacher, who was teaching us all about the colonial revolution, gave me an assignment one day because I used to take my camera to class every day just to look cool, right? And he called me out one day in the middle class. He says, "So tell me, you're really into photography. What can you tell me about Matthew Brady?" And I'm sitting there like, okay, so do I try to BS him or what? And I didn't know a thing. I really didn't. So I told him I didn't know. So he says, okay, tomorrow I want a 7-page report on Matthew Brady. And he was dead serious. So I went home, pulled out Encyclopedia Britannica, and boom, did my report on Matthew Brady. And for those of you that don't know the name, Matthew Brady is the person who is responsible for most, not all, but most of the images that we have of the Civil War in the United States. So my biggest idol, ironically at the time, he was about as close to being kind of a rock star as a photographer could be. He was not uncommon to see his name in the kind of pop culture or entertainment columns, or in the gossip news, or even like in People magazine. Okay. And I was fortunate enough when I was 16 years old. So this was 1976. I was fortunate enough to see him in person from a few feet away. I didn't get to talk to him, but I was extremely excited that I saw him for the few minutes that I did. I was excited to see him wearing his kind of what he was very well known for from a style standpoint at the time, and that was his long black trench coat that he routinely wore. And at this time in 1976, when I saw him, he already was one of the youngest photographers to win a Pulitzer Prize for journalism. He had won his award for feature photography in 1972 for his images from Vietnam, Cambodia, refugees escaping from East Pakistan into India. 2 years after that, in 1974, he was appointed, as the result of having done a photo shoot with this person, and that shot became a cover on Time magazine. He was appointed President Gerald R. Ford's personal photographer in the White House. In the photography world, this became a really, really big deal because he was smart enough, fortunate enough to essentially demand from President Ford unfettered access to the president, to the Oval Office. He developed an extremely good and trusting relationship with President Ford, so he brought us images from inside the executive branch of our government, unlike anything that we had ever seen before. So I saw him in person in 1976 while he was at a campaign stop with then President Ford in a small suburban shopping mall outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And that's when Ford was running against Carter. His name, which I've been holding off on for those of you that don't know who this is, and if you don't know by now who I'm talking about, shame on you. You should know. He is Mr. David Hume Kennerly. So my original plan for talking to you about my idols was to tell you about 5 or 6 of my idols, some of whom I mentioned before in answer to questions here on TOGCHAT, some of whom I've never talked about, it just hasn't come up, and to show you a little bit of the work and share with you some links. However, very, very lucky chance set of circumstances. While getting some material together on Mr. Kennerly today, I came across a video that is a little kind of documentary piece about his life and his career as a photographer. And I am connected to him on Facebook. So I thought, hey, why not? I sent him a message and said, hey, would you mind if I share this video during my live stream and actually show it? And he responded back and he said, sure, go for it. And asked if I would share a link to the show and everything. And I thought, hey, you don't get what you don't ask for, right? So I asked him if he would be open to doing an interview with me. Not the normal kind of fanboy interview of, how did you become a photographer? But really more about how he approaches his work today, especially as a person who has been in the business for so many years and who has seen so much. It's important for those of you that don't understand and don't know of him. Mr. Kennerly has photographed more presidents, sitting presidents in the United States than any other photographer that is around today. 10, I believe, is the correct number of presidents that he has photographed at this point. His images have appeared, in magazines and magazine covers all over the world, newspapers. He has documented history in over 100 countries, covered 12 presidential campaigns, served as a contributing editor for Newsweek magazine for 10 years. He was a contributing photographer for Time and Life magazines for more than 15 years. American Photo magazine named Kennerly one of the 100 most important people in photography. And Washingtonian magazine, called Kennerly one of the 50 most important journalists in Washington, D.C. His work has been exhibited widely, and he maintains a busy publishing and appearance and lecture schedule. He has written books and published books, including one all about iPhone photography. Yeah, okay. A really cool little thing about Mr. Kennerly, and then I'm going to share this video with you. In 2019, the University of Arizona, they have the Center for Creative Photography. They house that there. They acquired the David Hume Kennerly Archive, which features almost 1 million images, prints, objects, memorabilia, correspondence, all kinds of stuff dating back to 1957. The Kennerly Archive includes iconic portraits of U.S. presidents, world leaders, celebrities, unknown individuals, as well as personal correspondence and mementos such as the helmet and the camera that Kennerly used while photographing the Vietnam War. Other photographers' works who are housed in the Center for Creative Photography: Ansel Adams, Edward Weston, Richard Avedon, W. Eugene Smith, honestly, scores of other legendary photographers. So I want to go ahead and I want to share this short 4-minute video with you guys. I'm going to shut up and take myself off the screen. For those of you that don't know a lot about David Kennerly and his career, allow me to share this with you, and then we'll come back and we'll chat a little bit more, because ultimately I would like for his images to do the speaking here.
For more than 50 years, David Hume Kennerly has documented history with his camera. His singular perspective and relentless determination have helped Kennerly create unforgettable images of the powerful and the powerless alike. The David Hume Kennerly Archive is unparalleled for its depth and breadth. It takes a sweeping look at history in the making, the people who made it, and some of the most important events of our times.
It all started with a cat, our family cat. I took a picture of her when I was 10 years old. That early photo got me excited about the idea of capturing what was going on around me. I was always dreaming about being somewhere other than where I was at the moment.
Howard Feynman, former Newsweek chief political correspondent, said, "Kennerly is as good as it gets in a craft he defined."
I was in Saigon when I got a telex from UPI headquarters. Kennerly has won the Pulitzer Prize for photography. Then in typical wire service fashion, added, "Need soonest comment." Vietnam was the biggest story of my generation. I felt an obligation to document the story that was killing so many of us. Every frame I took in Vietnam went straight to my heart. Now, I'm proud to be a photographer, and I'm fortunate to be one who went into war and came out alive. When I got back from Vietnam, Watergate was the big story. I took a picture of Gerald R. Ford that ended up on the cover of Time after Nixon picked him to replace Vice President Agnew, who had resigned. That led directly to me becoming the chief White House photographer.
Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev said, "Kennerly's work is more than just photography. It's history."
People ask if there's any world event that I regret not shooting. Of course, everything I missed, but it wasn't much. Every photographer No matter what they do, provide a service, and that is to give insight into who we are and what makes us tick. You will find those secrets in the photographs.
Ansel Adams said, Kennerly sets forth a positive testimony that photography as a language can speak truth.
Journalists, photographers are the people who keep us informed. We're the truth tellers. My job is to show people what they don't want to see, and it's how they find out what's real. A great photo is one that makes you sit up and pay attention. There are certain pictures that you see that just never go out of your mind. I'm going to keep shooting until the day I die. I'll never stop being curious, and I'm never going to put down my camera.
Very cool stuff, eh? So, here's the really cool news. He has agreed to sit down and do an interview with me next Tuesday. We're going to record it because I want to be able to take my time. I don't want to push it live because even tonight we saw what happened in the middle of a live show. I want to make sure that everybody gets to see it. So I will be sharing that next Wednesday on TOGCHAT. It's ironic. I was actually planning, my wife and I were planning a trip to Arizona this August so that I could visit the Center for Creative Photography. Unfortunately, that trip may have to be postponed, given the current circumstances, but fingers crossed it will happen sooner than later. It's definitely kind of on my bucket list of things to do. So I've got some questions coming in. What I want to have you guys do, I'm sorry. I'm not sure if I'm able to share this properly or not now because of everything disconnecting. Oh, good. It reconnected the way it should have. I did put in the chat window, and I'm going to put it in one more time because it's gone by now, the link to David Kennerly's website. I would encourage you, check it out. You can read about him. There's a great bio piece in there. Also, many of his images. Just absolutely incredible work. And interestingly, there were a couple of comments that went by while that video was playing that I think are worth just touching on. And actually, I think both of them were from WorkPix 360. But this first one, it's interesting that so much of what we still honor photographically doesn't need any color at all. And there's a lot of value to that statement in the sense that I think a big part of that is that color is in some ways a more challenging medium when it comes to news in photojournalism. And this is just my opinion. It'll be interesting to see what Mr. Kennerly has to say about this next week. But I think that color is sometimes maybe a little bit more challenging to really kind of isolate details and isolate emotions. Certainly color can be used to express motion and really kind of control the way that we process that in an image. But black and white just isolates things and keeps them so simple. And then WorkPix also asked, is it fair to say that most of David's work was natural light, essentially not worrying about noise and things like that, but more about the decisive moment? So first of all, let's take the middle of that question. I assure you that through most of his career, noise was not even something that we talked about in terms of our images. Noise was something that he would have talked about in terms of, surroundings that he was dealing with in wartime and things like that, right? Certainly I think it's fair to say, and we'll learn a little bit more about him next week, but I think it's fair to say that the majority of his work was natural light and definitely decisive moment. However, I can tell you that Mr. Kennerly has a very successful commercial career. and still does a lot of commercial work for Bank of America and other really major corporate clients that are not all natural light images, that do involve lighting and set work and location work and all kinds of stuff like that. So, there's one thing, and I've said this before in our conversations, and one thing about photography that you have to understand, right? A good photographer, in other words, a photographer that truly understands the fundamentals, the basics, the underlying principles of making a good picture, is able to handle almost any kind of assignment. And I'll go so far as to say, well. Not great, not amazing, not incredible, but well. As I've shared with you guys in the past, I've done food photography, I've done product photography, I've done portraits, I've done weddings, and I've done it all successfully, but not amazingly. Those were not categories that I was particularly passionate about, and indeed, certainly it makes it easier to do really, really well when you're dealing with a category that you are passionate about. So anyway, very, very excited about the fact, and I will share more details as the week goes on, but next Wednesday, I will have a recorded interview with Mr. Kennerly. And then I'm going to drop some names for now, but what I'll do is I'll make it a point then over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to share a lot more detail about some of my other photographers that I idolize, some of whom are still alive and whom, yes, I'm working on trying to arrange an interview with, and others who have passed on, but nonetheless, they were a major influence to me. The first one I'll mention is a name that most of you, well, pretty much all of you, will not know this name, but it's a name that was important to me. He's not a photographer who was famous or nationally known or internationally known. He was a newspaper photographer. He's still alive today. He's retired and living in Florida, living a good life. His name is Willard Kriebel. Willard Kriebel worked at the hometown newspaper where I grew up as the North Penn Reporter for 35 years. During that time, he was twice named Pennsylvania Press Photographer of the Year. He won over 200 state and national awards for his newspaper work. And he was one of my early mentors. It was because of Willard Kriebel that the photographs that I took the evening that I saw David Kennerly, the photographs I took of Gerald Ford, wound up being my first Associated Press images. And one of them went on to appear in an article in Newsweek magazine a week and a half later. And that's because of the circumstances that took place that night where the Ford White House decided to leave the media out of that particular event. It was a very small shopping mall. It was packed. Apparently, they had also been somewhat unhappy with a story that had run in the media the day before. So it was kind of the payback. So outside of David Kennerly, who was traveling with the president, and of course would not be submitting his photos to the wire services, I was the only other photographer there. I was a 16-year-old teenager. I didn't have press credentials. I went there after school with a friend of mine. I hadn't even gotten my license yet. So the friend drove. We waited for 4 hours. So we were right in front of the rope and literally about 10 feet from the podium. And Willard Kriebel, the chief photographer of the North Penn Reporter, was kind enough that what he would have me do is whenever I had pictures that I was particularly happy with or proud of, I would go by the newspaper, put them in an envelope, put my name on them, and hand them to the front desk receptionist. She would make sure that he got them. He would take a look at them when he had a few minutes, and he would write comments and give me feedback on the back of the prints, stick them back in the envelope, and send them back down the desk. So I'd stop back at the newspaper 2 or 3 days later, and I'd pick them up. So those particular pictures of Gerald Ford, I was really excited about them. I thought they looked every bit like the pictures that you see from Associated Press and that you see in all the major newspapers. So I dropped them off the next morning. And then, sure enough, I came home from school that day, and the newspaper showed up, and there were my pictures splashed across the front page of the newspaper, and also with an Associated Press byline, which, of course, for a 16-year-old kid, I was like over the moon that was the case, right? So another name This is a name that you can Google, and I'll share more information as we get to him on my list. This is a gentleman who is from Boston. He is still active in the industry as a television photojournalist, but back in the 1970s, he held the distinction of being the first photographer to win back-to-back Spot News Photography Pulitzer Prizes. Now, you have to understand how incredibly difficult, in fact, almost impossible that is. There are several other photographers who have won more than one Pulitzer. In fact, I think there is a photographer who's up to 4, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm really ashamed. I should know her name because she's from Pennsylvania, and I cannot remember her name. However, I digress. Spot News is a category that you have, as a photographer, you have no control over. Meaning it's got to be an event that happens and you just happen to be the person that's there and, of course, happen to record an incredible and dramatic image. The photographer who I'm referring to is a gentleman by the name of Stanley Foreman. He won the Spot News Pulitzer Prize Award in 1976 and 1977. And ironically, he had taken the photograph that won him the award in 1977 before the 1976 award was even announced. What's that mean? It means that he took the 2 images in a very, very close proximity of each other time-wise, okay? So I will share more about him, but again, Stanley Foreman, you can feel free to look him up. More to the commercial side of things and my influences was a gentleman by the name, and I've talked about him numerous times here on TOGCHAT before, Peter Turner. Peter Turner, who has unfortunately since passed, but an incredible photographer. At the time, he was doing things with color film that we've just never seen. Color film back in the 70s and the 80s and that, it had limitations. You know, Kodachrome was known for being kind of very blue and cold tones. Ektachrome was known for being very blue and kind of cold tones. Kodachrome was very warm and really loved the reds and the blacks. Okay, it had much more contrast to it. Turner was doing things with the most intense, vibrant, kind of in-your-face colors that were absolutely amazing. And then the next person on my list was actually an early assistant to Peter Turner. And this is a gentleman who is still very active as a photographer today, has an incredible body of work that if you look at the 2 of them, if you look at Peter Turner's work and then look at Eric Miola's work, especially his early work, you can see the influences from Peter Turner. And as I mentioned, his name is Eric Miola. Again, an absolutely incredible photographer who has been named the Advertising Photographer of the Year, all kinds of other awards, published in tons of magazines, traveled the world, and indeed has several series of images that you will recognize, including some of the most iconic images of Bruce Springsteen from the Born to Run album are Eric Miola's, okay? One other name, and that's where I'm going to stop for tonight. We're going to get into the questions. And I see those questions coming. Keep them coming, guys, okay? One other name is a gentleman who I've also mentioned on here before. His name is Peter Galland. Peter Galland actually started as an actor, became a photographer, and he really, in my opinion, kind of developed and established the genre of glamour photography in this country. He shot over 1,000 magazine covers, which were mostly glamour shots of women. However, he did photograph tons of celebrities, Rock Hudson, Robert Wagner. He shot covers for Rolling Stone, Playboy, Modern Photography, and he even invented his own camera called the Galland Flex camera, which down the road was also used by photographers like Andy Leibovitz, Yusuf Karsh. So I will share more about these people with you as we go down the pike with this. But for next week, we're going to learn a lot more about David Hume Kennerly and how a man of his experience, his stature, keeps it fresh and keeps the passion alive and still finds new and exciting ways to be able to generate and create images that are relevant, that are visually interesting and unique and stand out. So the hardest thing for me is going to be not the kind of fangirl, because I'm not going to lie. Like I just, as a teenager, this was the person for me that I was trying to emulate, whose career I wanted to follow. And obviously I made other life choices and went in different directions, but, he at the time was truly a rock star. And to this day, I honestly think that he is honestly an iconic piece of American history. So looking forward to sharing that with you. So Doyle Hughes, does he still shoot and film? Not primarily, no. He's, in fact, David Kennerly is a Canon Explorer of Light, actually. So he's primarily a digital shooter at this point. I don't know if he maybe shoots some film. We'll find out, but yeah, I don't know that for a fact. So, all right. So let's start with some questions here. And guys, there's not a lot here. So if I totally want to try and get a full hour, and I'll go till 7:30. So type away, right? So Eric, my passion for photography has waned. That's not good, man. I think it has to do with not knowing how to get organized. I have a computer full of photos, some I really like, but don't know the best way to basically organize. Help. Well, organization is an issue, I think, for every photographer. It's kind of an issue of, I shouldn't say kind of an issue, it's a matter of how much of an issue. So photography aside, the key challenge word in your statement is organization, right? Some people are simply more organized than others. Some people find it easier. Some people are OCD and neurotic about it. That would be me. So part of the challenge there is it really kind of depends upon your personality to begin with. Certainly I don't know you, Eric, but based on the way you have phrased your question, it sounds like part of your challenge is you're not a guy that's, particularly OCD and overly organized in the first place. And I don't mean that in any way to be insulting. I just mean, be kind of like my wife, right? My wife is the polar opposite of me when it comes to organization and things like that, okay? So the challenge, Eric, if that's the case, is for you to find a system that's simple, because the more detailed you make the system, the more impossible it is going to be for you to maintain it, right? Because it's just going to be a problem right out of the box. And I will say this, I am going to give you a suggestion, but before I get to that suggestion, do a little bit more soul searching and be honest with yourself. Because to me, I also know a lot of photographers that are very disorganized, and they have pictures all over their computers, and they can never find their pictures. But yet on the other side of that fence, they're still shooting like crazy, because at the end of the day, they love the process of taking pictures more than they love the process of finishing and organizing and filing and all that stuff. The fact that you seem to be equating your lack of picking up the camera and shooting with the fact that you are disorganized, I understand how maybe the correlation is, well, I don't want to add to the mess, so that's why I'm not shooting. But to me, photography for me has always been about the experience. It's not actually about the photography. It's about the access to people. It's experiencing people. Hopefully, maybe you can understand a little bit of why I admire, people like David Hume Kennerly, who just imagine the stories that this man can tell. Imagine the experiences he's had, the things that he has lived through, right? As a shy teenager, photography was access to me. And it still is access to me. I mean, today I had a conversation with my idol. Who knew? Like, how crazy is that, right? So photography is access to people. So part of it, Eric, is decide or at least figure out what about photography does excite you, right? What is the key? What is the part that makes you want to pick up the camera? Because I have a feeling that doesn't have anything to do with organizing, right? And then what I would do is I as much as I frequently talk about not being a big fan of programs like Lightroom and things like that, if you are not big on organizing, if you are not big on having to set up a system and maintain it and all that, a program like Lightroom is perfect then for you, really, because it kind of forces that. In order to work on your photos, you have to import them into Lightroom. So it would be a lot easier for you to maybe set up an external drive, or depending on how many pictures you have, get them all into one spot, one folder, one hard drive, whatever, and then simply import them into Lightroom. One thing that a lot of photographers that I talk to will do, and I encourage them to do this, maybe you're at a point with your progression in your photography where most of the work you have that's sitting in that unorganized mess, it's okay, but it's not like, oh my God, it's the most amazing work ever. I don't know how often I'll refer to this work again. You could essentially start a folder that basically says old, and take all that work. And maybe you don't organize it beyond putting it in that old folder. But then you begin, as you move forward, with a system that is organized. Maybe it's organized by date. Maybe it's organized by subject category. Maybe you do use a program like Lightroom to help you organize it when you import the images. It's honestly doesn't have to be that big a challenge, right? You guys got to do a little bit of soul searching and decide, where's my real issue here? The thing that concerns me most, Eric, with your statement, it's I've lost passion, and then you're equating it to not being organized. I'm not sure that's really, what's going on. So just be honest with yourself. Photography is just a ton of fun. Probably the first time you picked up a camera, when you first bought a camera, it was fun for you. It is for most people. It was for me, and it is for most people that I know. You need to go back to that. Remember why. I always tell people, you hear me say it here all the time, remember why you picked up your camera for the first time. Why did you buy your first camera? What was it all about? If you can never forget that, if you can always keep that top of mind, it'll never get old, right? Because that will drive what you do. It will drive the decisions you make. It will drive the subjects that you choose to photograph. So, long answer. I hope that helps, but that would be my recommendation. Okay. Sean Vine mentioning David Kennerly is on Instagram as well. Yes, in fact, he shares all his iPhone photographs. I mentioned he wrote a book on iPhone photography, and he shares all his iPhone photographs on Instagram. So, indeed. So let's see here. Sean Vine, when is somebody going to interview you, Joe? Joe has a lot more to accomplish before he's worth interviewing, in my opinion. And I'm not saying that to be modest. I mean, look at what I shared with you, about a person like David Hume Kennerly. My successes in my photography career were kind of very personal, and if anything, maybe very selfish even. This is a man who has witnessed and been a part of history, and continues to be. He could go retire and rest on his laurels and be an icon until the day he's gone, but he's not. He's still shooting. He's still active. So, I mean, that's incredible as far as I'm concerned. But so from Mike here, to go along with the organization question, have you done a video showing how you catalog photos? I remember you saying once that you could find any photo you've taken in a few seconds. Yes, in a few minutes, but yes. I have talked about that in videos. I've shared it actually here in a TOGCHAT. And Mike, it's a good time to bring it up. I will be doing a webinar in the next couple of weeks. That one is not scheduled, but it is on my prep list for webinars about filing organization, backup systems, all that kind of stuff. And since we're talking very briefly about the webinar stuff, I want to bring you guys up to speed because I've got a couple that are coming up, right? So the first one here, let me grab my links so that I can share this one with you. The first one is coming up this Friday, right? So for any of you that fall into one of two categories, either you are trying to make money as a photographer at any level, full-time, part-time, a little bit on the side, whichever, or for that matter, if you are trying to just simply build a social media presence, okay? The topic is called Build Your Personal Brand. Clients hire you, not your camera. This is a webinar you don't want to miss. It's free. It's Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock. I just shared the link in the chat window. You can sign up for it. And I'll give you a little tip. I realize that some of you are still considered essential employees and have to go to work. And by the way, for those of you that do still have to go to work, and especially if you're frontline people, my God, thank you for your service, okay? If you can't make it Friday at 1 o'clock, but can watch it maybe Friday night or Saturday morning, whichever, go ahead, if you're interested, go ahead and register. It's free. As soon as the webinar is over, in about an hour after the webinar ends, you'll receive an email with a link that will be available for 48 hours to be able to watch the replay of the webinar. Okay, so if it's something that you're interested in and you can't be there at 1 o'clock on a Friday, no problem. You can still watch it. And then the following Thursday evening, so this will be Thursday, May 7th, I have webinar coming up, The Secret Powers of Raw Files. So you guys ask me all the time about my processing and how I do processing. And in the Stuck at Home Challenge videos, I was sharing a lot of it, but kind of like very fast. So this is basically a webinar that is all about Camera Raw. So ACR, Adobe Camera Raw, how it's meant to work, what all the sliders mean, how I use it, what I would recommend for you, and then most importantly, the fact that what you really need to do, whoops, and I just realized I've got stuff all over that screen there, don't I? Wow, okay, so it's not sharing the way it was supposed to, but at least you can see it, so we'll work with that. It's going to help you establish a system for working with your files in Camera Raw. And that, I mean, honestly, that's really like the big piece of it is you have to have a system, okay? All right, and then let's see, the last one that I want to share with you here, let's reload the page. This one is for Friday, May 8th. So this is Friday, a week away. I will share the link for this one also. There's a price tag on this one, gang, but it's $15, okay? So this is going to be a smaller group. There will be more interactivity. And this one is how to make photography website that gets you noticed. So for those of you that are in business, trying to build a business, want to build a business, this will help you avoid a lot of the most common mistakes that photographers make when it comes to, yeah, and we lost it all together there, didn't we? Okay, so I just gave you the link. I apologize. When the feed came back up, it didn't grab the browser for the share. So again, that one's only $15. All the others are free. So I hope to see you there. Okay. All right. Enough of my advertising. Let's get back to the questions. All right. From Nerd45. How do you think the coming COVID-19 recession depression will impact the photography business? It's going to crush it, man. It's already crushed it. I think it's reasonable to say that probably 90%, if not higher, of photographers are essentially out of business right now, especially when you talk about categories like portraits, weddings, so much. It's gone. It's done. It's going to take time, right? I will make no secrets of it, and I don't want to get into any kind of a political discussion. I don't want to talk about any kind of, fake news or conspiracy theories and none of that. So please pay a little respect and don't go there, right? But here's a reality, right? The reality of it is, and for me, I kind of follow the health organizations, CDC, World Health Organization. I talked about that before. If we look at what they have been predicting since January, if we look historically at the last pandemic 100 years ago, the simple reality of it is this is not going to be over anytime soon. And even though states are starting to open up, and believe me, I want to get out and about and get back to work just as much as the next guy, in all likelihood, having large gatherings is just not going to be an option. So maybe, doing small one-on-one stuff, maybe that opens up. But then the problem is, who's going to want to do that? Who's going to want to take that risk? For me, I am at an age that's considered to be higher risk of this, this virus. So I don't know even if I would want to get back to shooting that way, where I'm going to be working, one-on-one and that type of thing. So I think it's going to be very damaging. I think ultimately, Eric, thank you so much for the super chat, man. I really, really appreciate it. But I'm not, Nerd45, I'm not of the mentality of like, the sky is falling, the world is over, life sucks. I mean, obviously, everything about our situation in the world right now sucks. I mean, yeah, we're seeing a lot of good coming from a lot of people, and that is a wonderful thing. That's part of the human condition. but I don't think there's anybody out there that's excited about where we are at right now. Okay, there's going to be a lot of pain, financial pain. Things are going to change. Life is going to change for quite a while. To me, we make the best of it. Gang, that's a big part of why I started the Stuck at Home Challenge. That's a big part of why I'm doing my webinars. I'm not going to be able to teach in person, but I can teach the large groups in a webinar. And I'm actually combining several different pieces of software, if you got to see the one last week, so that I can make the webinars as much like an in-person presentation as humanly possible without, of course, being in person, right? So I think we have to adapt. I think we're going to have to be more patient than many of us have ever been. Myself, I know for sure, in our entire lives. But it'll come back. It's just going to take time, unfortunately. So Eric's got a follow-up here. You may well be a carpenter. You hit the nail on the head. Thanks so much. Yeah, and Eric, again, please don't take anything I said about lack of passion and reasoning as any kind of insult. Just I hear that from people a lot. And more often than not, it's because they've kind of succumbed to the pressures of social media or what they see online. And it's just about get back to why. If you can focus on the why, no matter where you go with it, if you focus on the why and you keep that a big part of what you do always, it'll always be fun. It'll always be interesting. And as I talk about here many, many times, I mean, that's such a big part of why I still have the energy that I do for what I do, because I'm having fun with it. And especially now that I've kind of come to this other side of my career, I pick up the camera and I shoot what I want, when I want, the way I want. And you guys know how I feel about rules, right? So it is kind of like going back to the beginning when I was naive and I didn't know about any of those rules or didn't have social media or any of that other crap. So it's kind of, going full circle, in that regard. So yeah, always remember your why. Okay. So Eric, seriously, thank you so much for your kind words and thank you for the super chat. I really, really sincerely appreciate it. So let's see here. Scrolling on back. And where was it here? From WorkPix 360. When it comes to speedlights, have you seen much difference in the differences in color rendering? Or is it just not that important? Or is it more something to fix in post? If you're talking about like from one brand to the next, certainly it's possible that you could see a difference. But that difference that you're going to see, WorkPix, is going to be so minuscule. I don't think part of the reason why for me I'm crunching my forehead and saying is that even a thing? The work that I do, portraits, fashion portraits, beauty portraits, even if it were photojournalism, since we started out the night talking about photojournalism, it's all subjective. So, certainly, and I use this example a lot, if I was being hired by the Louvre in France and I was to reproduce the Mona Lisa, it would be extremely important that the purity of my color and the CRI and the relationships of the colors and the tones and everything were perfect. Nothing about the work that I do has to be perfect. It's all subjective. There's a creative element involved. So, is there a difference? Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there is, but I certainly don't think that it's a dramatic difference. I would have to expect that it's extremely subtle, and I don't know that I would even consider it something that you fix in post, because what are you fixing? Like, when you say, about the color being off, are you actually like taking a color chart and doing measurements? In which case, well, okay, then you're going to fix something. But do you mean like, would there be a difference and one flash is going to be like really yellow? No, that kind of difference is not going to happen. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Scrolling back up. We got that one from John here. Occasionally use CTO warming filter gels on my speedlights and strobes. I've encountered issues of saturation and influence. What do you recommend and best practice? Do you ever utilize them? Fortunately, John, at this point, like never, only because I don't have a need. I used CTOs a lot back in the day. So back in the film days, I would particularly use CTOs, especially when I was working under fluorescent lighting conditions with daylight balance, color slide film. That was always like a nightmare. What you would do is you put a green CTO over your speedlight or your flash or your potato masher. You old folks will know what a potato masher is. And that way you would balance your flash to the fluorescent light that was already in the room. Okay. In the early days of digital, early 2000s, I was doing a fair amount of commercial and corporate work, like on location and some event work. At that point, just because auto white balance in the cameras was not that good, and because while we had raw files, they didn't have the kind of range that they do now. And I don't just mean dynamic range, but I just mean tolerance in terms of colors and everything. I would use CTOs then, same idea, to balance fluorescent with daylight or tungsten, etc. Because if you were working with too much of an extreme, you just would not be able to bring it back in post yet. Photoshop was not that advanced yet. The digital raw files did not have the kind of detail recording that they have today. So yeah, at this stage of the game, it's not that big a deal. And also too, I will point out that, John, depending on what you're shooting, like for instance, if you're a wedding photographer, having that mix of color temperatures can actually help you jazz your pictures up. It's like having gels built in, right? So, let's say there's a lot of tungsten lighting in the room. If you use a little bit of bounce flash or a small diffuser and you light your subject with your speed light, so that you've got daylight on your subject, then everything behind them is going to go kind of a golden yellow. It's going to go to a warm tone, which can really help pump up the colors. So just make sure that you aren't feeling you need to use the CTOs to reach, again, some, like we had in the other question, some type of kind of perfection with color balance, because really not using them sometimes with the technology we have now is often a way to just get incredibly creative results. Okay. So, all right, here, let's see. And next up here, Cooley Priestley, on the mentor stuff, can you ask marketing questions? Oh, absolutely, Cooley. Yeah, you can even ask me a marketing question here if you want. But yeah, you can totally, in the mentoring program, you can absolutely ask marketing questions. What he's talking about, for those of you that don't know, it is possible for you to have me as your photography mentor, where you have direct access to be able to ask me questions, literally via a text messaging program, and then get direct answers. So I'll share that link in here so you guys can check it out if you want. Okay. WorkPix 360 came back and said, for context, you're talking about product photography. Yeah, I mean, I would have to say, WorkPix, even going from one brand of speedlight to another, or even switching from speedlights to studio strobes, I don't think you are going to see a very dramatic or noticeable difference at all, unless potentially one of the speedlight brands that you're using is maybe like a really cheap knockoff brand. Then there might be more of a likelihood that there would, be some type of a color shift. But even for a lot of product photography, it's still somewhat subjective in terms of the color range. It depends on the product, depends on the client, et cetera. So, okay. Let's see here. From Mike, I can't wait to get going again with people. Part of my plan was to market themed portraits to the student athletes I was photographing on the field, parents and kids alike. Yeah, Mike, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, obviously everybody wants to get going. I don't think anybody's really enjoying this, but, the hardest, look, and again, I don't want to get political, so just my opinion. I think the hardest thing about this whole situation is that all of us have to remember that it's not just about any one of us. Just the idea, like, for instance, it seems that it doesn't hit younger people as bad as it hits older people, but yet there's plenty of young people that have died. And some had obvious pre-existing conditions. Some, they still can't figure out why this person who's in their 20s or 30s die because of it. So, I think really the hardest lesson that all of us have to learn, and I mean all of us, myself, everybody, this is the perfect example of it ain't about me. It's about all of us. So yeah, I mean, I think, Mike, when things do get back to normal, and when we do reach a point where that's safe to do and it's practical to do, because just like you're seeing, guys, in a lot of these states now that have started to open up like barbershops and tattoo parlors, whatever, right? It doesn't mean that people are going. So these businesses are open, but they're showing every day on the news how so many of them are also completely empty. People aren't showing up, right? So it's going to be no different for us as photographers. It's going to be that combination of, well, okay, we're now allowed to do it. And just because we're, shouting all over social media that says, hey, you can hire me and I'll do this, are people going to be ready for that? That's the unknown, right? That's the unknown that we don't know. So part of the challenge is we all need to be patient. We need to be supportive of each other, in the meantime, while that's happening. And then even when it's over, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be over, right? That's the really tough part. So let's see here. Glacier activities. So this was a whole bunch of statements here. So let me just see here. Something I've wondered about in isolation time now. I've discovered a young classical musician. She's sponsored to the level that she has a Steinway at home for doing old stuff. She's very old school and practicing her music. Where was his next one? I found that very interesting. A young person with a Patreon network that is so valuable that she makes Steinway loan her pretty expensive piano. Glacier activity, I'm willing to bet. I mean, I don't know who you're talking about. I don't need to know. But 10 to 1, she's probably got a YouTube following and that. And yeah, even a company like Steinway, I mean, they want people to know about their product and they want people to see what can be done with their product. We kind of take it for granted. It's like, well, gee, what can be done with the piano? You can play the piano, right? But the fact of the matter is there are multiple piano companies, and there's also the option, do we go with electric or do we go with the traditional? All that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that's pretty much in any genre or any industry you can think of. There are what are referred to in the social media world of influencers that companies will give, free product to. So, question from Lord R here. What is the best way to selling photography? Wow. Okay, so unfortunately, Lord R, that question's like really generic. Photography is an extremely broad word, right? So selling a fine art print is a lot different than selling a wedding photo. So you got to give me a little bit more specifics there, okay? But I will tell you this, and I'm not saying this to be a smarty pants, okay? The best way to sell photography is to take amazing photographs. Just is, right? Create the demand. Do great work, and the demand will be there, okay? So let's see here. I thought I saw another one up the top. Christopher Davis, what's a good lens for family portraits? I'm thinking about the 35mm f2. Christopher, if you're still here and if you can type quick, let me know. Are we talking full frame or what are you shooting here? And even then, that's a tough answer to give you because when we say a family portrait, are we talking a family portrait with 3 people? Or are we talking a family portrait with 30 people, right? So you might even want to consider about potentially looking at a zoom lens. It's got a little bit more range if you're on a budget, okay? I would say that if you're talking smaller group family portraits, 35mm might be a tad wide. So that's why I'm curious as to what format you're shooting. Full frame, APS-C, micro four thirds. So FN89, do I use SmugMug? I don't, but I am familiar with it. Obviously, it can be used for a bunch of different things. So if there's a little bit more to that, let me know specifically what you're trying to find out about it, okay? We're just about out of time here, guys. So go ahead, type. I'll try and get 1 or 2 more in here. I'm just scrolling back to see if there's anything I missed. I think I got everything that was in here. So type away if you've got those 1 or last 2. Oh, Sean mentioned David's book, yes, which is called Shooter. Came out in 1979. Yeah, it's an awesome book. Highly recommend it. Let's see here. Just make sure I didn't miss anything. Got all of those. Got those. No, okay. We got everything. And it's 7:30. Look at that. Well, interesting start to the night. You gotta love it when the power goes out, but at least for once it wasn't me having a technology issue. So I'm really happy about that, okay? So anyway, I hope to see some of you Friday afternoon, 1 p.m. here in the US for the webinar all about personal branding. And believe me, if you're on the fence, it's not like hardcore about business stuff. It will help you a lot with social media as well. So check that out. There are two last quick things that came in. I knew they were coming as soon as I started saying goodbye. FN89, you want to set up an online gallery and sell photos? Yes, 3 website companies to look at. SmugMug, Pixie Set, and oh my God, somebody help me. Why am I forgetting the third? SmugMug, Pixie Set, and I'm completely drawing a blank. Guys, help me out. I know somebody's thinking of the other third one because I talk about it all the time when this comes up. SmugMug, Pixie Set. Come on, I'm counting on somebody. Type in, what's the third one? Okay. While we're waiting for that, let me get this last question because it's an Olympus question. Steve, just got my OMD EM1 Mark III. Where's the best tutorial site? Honestly, there's not a ton of tutorials out there yet, Steve. But I will tell you, getolympus.com here in the US. So it's getolympus.com. Check out the Learning Center. There's a ton of really, really great stuff there. And honestly, just hit YouTube. You'll find some of the stuff that's out there. If you're an Olympus shooter already, and you're moving up from like the EM1 Mark II to the Mark III, my honest advice would be, what do you need a tutorial for? Read your instruction manual. Because really all you have to do is learn about the differences between the two cameras. That's the only thing you need. If you're moving from another brand, then yes, absolutely. Start at getolympus.com. And then I will tell you, if you are new to Olympus, Stephen, Olympus is doing a thing right now called Home with Olympus, where you can actually join these little webinars that are put on by the Olympus tech reps. So I would strongly encourage you to sign up for a couple of those. And you can actually get that information from getolympus.com. Also, Stephen, make sure you join this Facebook group. It's the OMD Education Facebook group on Olympus. They don't allow any photo posting. It's your first Olympus. And join that group for starters, yes. So they only allow technical questions. When I was considering my switch from Nikon, this was the first place I went on somebody's recommendation, and it is great. Extremely helpful people. So it's all about learning technical stuff about Olympus cameras. And then by all means, hit up getolympus.com and make sure that you are signing up for some of those webinars. Not Squarespace, Patrick, not Shootproof. FN89, remember to ask me next week. I am so sorry, but I am literally just like drawing a blank on it. You know what? Here, wait. We can find it. If you go to my YouTube channel, I'm just going to do it for you since I can't get the screen to share properly right now. I talked about it in my video about websites for photographers. So bear with me 1 second here. It's going to be in this video. I will share the link here. In this video, I talk about SmugMug, Pixie Set, and whatever the last one is. But anyway, all right, gang. Hey, seriously, thanks for being here. Thanks for coming back after everything that went south. In all this craziness, make sure you're finding time to take pictures. I haven't been posting this week because I've been trying to get all this webinar stuff set up, but I've still been doing my Stuck at Home challenge, so I will catch up on images hopefully this weekend and get them all posted. But I'm still shooting every day. Like, it's religious. It's happening. And hopefully I'll see some of you for the webinar on Friday. If you're in my mentoring group, I'll see you Friday at 5:30 for our Zoom chat. And, of course, we'll be back here next Wednesday for TOGCHAT. Whatever you do, gang, as always, thank you, and please remember these words.
Thanks for watching another live episode of TOGCHAT. Now, pick up that camera and shoot something, because your best shot is your next shot. So keep learning, keep thinking, and keep shooting. Adios.